in church, what I've realized, and I had to, and I consistently have to remind myself in this to stay, I feel healthy and sane, is to remember that like church is a revolving door. We're getting people in and out every single Sunday, every single week. I do think though, with the younger generation, what they are seeking is, and what I'm experiencing is more mentorship, right? That it's the true discipleship. Like, hey,
Boom.
come in. I want to invite you and come and walk life, come and experience life with me. We're starting to see churches struggling to find actually good, committed, either high level volunteers or staff. I was like, let me come in alongside you and help you with this. Take this burden away from you, right? Um, in hindsight, I realized like completely way off.
Hello, everyone. Dennis Allen, along with Raymond Monroe. This is the Disciple Dilemma. And today we want to talk about a peculiar thing, challenges facing disciples. Now, you've heard us use that title before, but never with executive pastors. And we've got a great conversation today with Kevin Bugingo, who's the founder of XP Gathering. That's Executive Pastor Gathering. Kevin's based on the West Coast. He's actually an executive pastor at Discovery Church, Moreno Valley, California, as well as being a husband and a dad and a podcaster. This founder, this MBA who's been in the business world, is talking to us about how tough it is to be a pastor, an executive pastor. What are the expectations? What's it like putting up with folks like you and me? How do you disciple in that sort of a role? What are some of the strategic challenges facing churches, pastors, staffing, leadership in churches as we try to make disciples and as we try to reach out to a world? Those kinds of questions are going to get answered today with Kevin as Raymond and I speak with him. Here we go. Kevin Bugingo, we are so grateful you would join us on the Disciple Dilemma. Thanks and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to be here, Dennis. Thank you, Raymond. I'm looking forward to having this conversation and just talking kingdom stuff and building God's kingdom. I love it. I geek out about this thing.
I want to spend some time probing the mind of the executive pastor of Discovery Christian Church, and who's also the founder of XP Gathering Network, the Executive Pastor Network. Kevin, I think Raymond and I keep hearing all the time that it's really challenging to be a pastor, and for an awful lot of reasons, but we wanted to hear firsthand from you. What are the stories that you have and or you hear, if you were to give us a minute or two summary of life as an executive pastor in your world today? What's it like out there?
Life as an executive pastor is, just be ready to have wearing multiple hats, to be flexible on shifting and changing vision or strategy for Sunday to Sunday. Being an executive pastor is I always kind of illustrate it in this way, being like healthy, you're a good, healthy, like, meat patty and being sandwiched by the vision of the lead pastor, being sandwiched by the pressures and the demands and the changes and the requirements to serve the staff underneath you. And so, and there's not a lot of outlet to just, to expand and stay healthy. But yeah, you get tension from above and underneath, and you literally are managing that tension on a weekly basis.
Let's take your church situation today. And so I'm just a guy walking off the street. And the question that I pose to you, Kevin, is, hey, you're just shielding your pastor from the reality of all the human beings out there. So he's getting no life in discipleship. That's a trap in one sense. What do you say, Pastor Bugingo? How do you protect your pastor so he is able to be a discipler?
That is so good, because I truly think that most of the times the structure that is set up in church is for the executive pastor to actually do that. Shield the senior pastor from having to deal with the nitty gritty of people because, prepping for the message every Sunday can be a lot. Doing some little, some counseling, some weddings, some, other events like that. And even like, leading the elders, vision casting, all, strategy can be I almost think it can be a lot. you know? And that's the framework, to be honest. I'll share a quick story. I think I stepped into in my previous church, I stepped into the executive pastoral because I saw a lack of leadership from my senior pastor, in the sense of pastoring, discipling others. And so I was like, let me help you. I was like, let me come in alongside you and help you with this. Take this burden away from you. Right. In hindsight, I realized like completely way off track and shouldn't have done that because the weight of that has to always stay with the senior pastor and you can't transfer it. As soon as you transfer it, I mean, you deal with what I dealt with, depression, anxiety, you dealt with burnout, all of those things that just, that just ends up building up and creating a toxic work environment.
Wow. So I'm thinking about this, and in any model of or an organization, you've got sort of, let's take the two senior guys. Let's say it's the senior pastor of your church and it's also Kevin, the XP. You
Yeah,
guys are kind of, that you the dynamic duo there. Um, my thought is that sometimes, this personality is Mr. Outdoor and this personality is Mr.
right,
Indoor. Okay,
right.
fair enough. This personality is more administrative. This person is much more relational. Fair enough. That's all good. But how do you, as an XP, promote what I'm going to use this phrase, the duty of a senior pastor to be a disciple? Well, how do you help a senior pastor realize
Mm,
that, yes, you have a job, that's your sort of eight to
yeah,
six, 5, 6 days a week. But everybody, no matter whether you're, selling shoes or selling sermons,
yeah.
your job is to also in your world disciple. How do you as an XP strike and think about that balance of getting your pastor to be able to be discipling as well as doing
Mm,
the stuff that you guys decide on as a senior pastor? How do you
yeah.
help in that?
I think let me tackle it in two ways, or even respond it in two ways, because I think um, majority of I think it's more recent and it's a unique situation. I think most executive pastors come in with the skill set that's more administrative, that's a little bit less ministerial and or pastoral. And so it's unique for an executive pastor to be able to be in tune with that and actually I would say I'll say most traditional executive pastors to be mindful of that and actually challenge the senior pastor in that space because they're coming in more from like the support on the administrative executing side of things versus the pastoral ministry side of things. Now they've expanded into you can have like three or four multiple executive pastors leading multiple different areas. But going back to your question though, I do think that it gets a little bit tough, especially when the senior pastor starts separating themselves from the congregation. One example is like, you know, preaching or emphasizing one of the major goals in your discipleship next step is to join a small group, right? And so you're pushing that as a senior pastor, you're pushing that as the executive team or the whole staff. But if like reality is like senior pastor isn't in a small group, executive pastor isn't in a small group, staff are not in a small group, you're championing something that you want the rest of the church to do, but you're not doing. So you see a lot of dynamics like that, a lot of situations like that with some senior pastors, some executive team members, some staff members, and those are elements that we see as a framework of what God's church should be doing on a weekly basis or even daily basis.
So I'm thinking about a question that Raymond raised a few minutes ago, and I really love pursuing this a little further, which is how do most executive pastors find their congregations? Avoid closeness and relationship at all costs because those people can get you fired, or dig in, walk alongside them, be transparent, be open, be vulnerable. What's the pressure dynamic and what's the cultural dynamic for executive pastors in churches like that?
Yeah, I think that um, there was a conference I was at, and I remember Kerry Newhoff highlighted this. He said, on average, pastors deal with well, on average per person, you deal with about seven key big relationship losses in your lifetime, right? And then he highlighted like on average, pastors right now are dealing with seven a year. These are relational losses.
Losses per year.
Yeah. And
Wow.
so
Per
that's
year.
like per year. And so that's like drastic, right? And so you thinking about like the dynamics that I have conversations with like senior pastors and even now like it's you see it with executive pastors. It's your guard, it's almost like I gotta guard my heart from being hurt relationally because last time I trained up this amazing young leader who I thought would be my successor, let's say senior pastor, even executive pastor, and eventually goes and plants a church across the street, or eventually like moves, and takes on another role at the church across the street or whatever. And so like, and it's a constant, in church, what I've realized, and I had to, and I consistently have to remind myself in this to stay, I feel healthy and sane, is to remember that like church is a revolving door. We're getting people in and out every single Sunday, every single week. Some who commit for a year, some will commit for 2 years, some will commit for five, and then can literally call you in 2 days and be like, hey, me and my family just decided we're moving to Texas. That's what a lot of people have been doing here in California. I just got a friend of mine who just called me like, hey, Kevin, can you help us with a youth pastor because our youth pastor is moving to Texas to go. So that's happening here consistently in California. And that's the reality of church is like you invest so much in people and without knowing at a blink or a snap of the finger, they're gone. And now you have to grieve that. And it's like now I got to open up my heart again to another new relationship that I have no clue what the outcome is going to be.
What do we need to do different to have communities of people who care for each other? I mean, we put them in small groups and make them get together once a week and share spaghetti, and that's supposed to build community. How do we get people to care about each other?
Yeah, I love that. I think the shift needs to change from um, the current metrics is off. I think the framework, I think even I would say maybe 5, 6 years ago, I
Yeah.
think the metrics of success for a church was how many people were attending on a Sunday. Like that was like the metrics of a healthy church because you have your seats are full, on a Sunday. That means you're a healthy church, you're doing well. But I think as executive pastors and even like church leaders have started to dive a little bit deeper, I think COVID honestly revealed that more because all of a sudden like Sunday attendance dropped, and now we had to measure success a little bit different, and recognizing most churches lost about two-thirds of their attendance even when they reopened. But the one thing that stayed consistent overall, like giving was stayed the same for most churches. And so it was kind of a reflection of like, oh wow, like we were really functioning off of like one-third of our members really invested at, in the work of what God is doing here at this church. And so I would highlight that, like, we have to look at what are we measuring, and instead of measuring who's registered for what, who's in what, let's measure how is like small groups helping you be a better neighbor, or how is this discipleship class, or how is even attending church, how is that helping you learn how to share your faith better. If we can start tracking those measurements versus just the simple measurements of like attending church, join a small group, start serving, like those are the three major metrics that churches track, and we can go a little bit deeper and track the actual actions that our members are taking to just grow the kingdom of God in their community.
For everybody who's listening, I've had a chance to spend a little time with Kevin when Kevin came over to DC, and he can swing a golf club, by the way. I was very impressed with that, and enjoyed talking to him. So I really feel like I'm talking to a brother in Christ and a friend. Kevin, I'm curious, are you guys in the millennial and Gen Z space doing any better on race than these stale, pale, male guys that you're talking to today? We just didn't do it well. How's it going in the world, the executive pastor looking at across the congregations that you're with?
I want to say the younger generation is more aware and intentional in that. I have my lead pastor is Garrison Polsgrove, white, 30. I don't want to see. I don't want to butcher his year, but I think he's 37, turning 38 this year. And from Kentucky, still has a little bit of a Kentucky accent, right?
In California.
In California. He's been in California for a while though. But I mean, he's a Kentucky native, and he's, coming to this church. He brought on the first Black guest pastor out of our, at the time, maybe 37 years of doing church here in Moreno Valley, and was intentional and has been intentional on making sure there's diversity on stage all the time, every Sunday. I think actually there was one recent Sunday, just because like somebody canceled and the whole team was white, and he was like, I don't want to see that. And I was like, okay, all right.
So
I love it, but I love that intentionality, because it's like because I didn't even like press on that as much, right? And not so I do think, to answer, I think that there is a certain degree of like of the younger generation pursuing diversity, and seeing the church a little bit more diverse.
how in the world, in terms of trying to integrate, how does discipleship work both within those two communities, and how do we begin to bring those communities together so we learn from one another and actually begin to grapple with the differences we have?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that, one of the things I'm trying to do with our network is literally, and that's my intentionality with our network, is to be diverse. And so our XP Gathering Network, I think we just dropped our numbers, or some of our stats from 2023, but I think we have like 30% female representatives in our network who are leading at high capacity. We have a good representation of younger leaders who are stepping into those roles. We've enhanced our our Black and Hispanic community into our network. One of the coolest things I love when we put together a gathering is just seeing the diversity of just seeing not only just by race, but even like denomination and
Sure.
and gender, and just seeing how everybody's interacting and finding out and recognizing like at the end of the day in ministry, we're all facing the same thing. It just might look a little bit different. Strategy might look a little bit different based off of where you are and how or what denomination you're in. But a really exciting thing that I've started to do more recently is to kind of take people out of their more comfortable space. One example, I've been taking about 12 to 15 pastors out to Wyoming, every year. And it's a great experience, partnership with Refuge, who serves pastors. And but I'll give you an example. So part of the activities, right? You're in Wyoming, what are you gonna do? Like there's fishing, there's riding a horse, there's hiking in the mountains. It feels like very different from one of my good friends who's in Pasadena, city boy, black pastor. I'm trying to invite him to, come out with me to Wyoming. He's like, to Wyoming to do what? I'm like, fishing. And he starts laughing. And not that, I think that's not just for a black person, but anybody who's like city, if I talk to a New York Italian, like, from like Brooklyn or something, they'll probably say the same thing. Like, what am I gonna do?
City
I don't
Slickers,
even
right? It was a Billy Crystal.
and so I think like being able but I taking some of these guys out of their comfort zone and in a mix of other brothers and sisters in Christ, slowing it down and getting to sit down and grab a meal together and find out like, man, we're actually more in common and have actually the same issues of trying to move people along in discipleship. We're having the same issues of members hurting our feelings and like or rejecting us and like all of those different things. We have all of those things in common. We're all questioning imposter syndrome of like if I'm supposed to be in this role or not, or is God transitioning me out. Like we're all dealing with the same issues in regards to our roles.
We're talking with executive pastor Kevin Bugingo, who is also the founder of XP Gathering Network in California, from Massachusetts, dad, podcaster, pastor, and he's got 2 daughters. So when we come back, we're going to get him to give us the MBA take on the strategic issues facing the XP world. Stick with us. Folks, we're back with Kevin Bugingo and Raymond Monroe, and we are talking about the world of an executive pastor. And Kevin, since you're an MBA, this ought to be a layup question for you. So it's just an ambush. I'm just going to throw it in your lap, and you got to swim with whatever you got here, right? So what are the major strategic challenges? If you think of 2 or 3 things that executive pastors are most aware of in the world ahead, the next couple of years, what's really keeping you guys awake at night?
Yeah, that's good. I know we put out some trends this year, but I would say honestly, some of the things that we're working through, I think churches are constantly working through is technology. It's always been highlighted that churches are always somewhat like 10 years behind than like what's already out there marketplace wise. And so just kind of catching up to it. I remember when COVID hit, there was a few churches that were calling up and trying to get, advice and consulting on how do I get on Facebook Live? How do I stream my service? And so, I mean, and Facebook Live had been around and streaming had been around for at least like 4 to 5 years at this point, and the easiness of it all. And so like just kind of seeing like the how behind churches are with technology. And I think technology is such a great tool right now because my I'm gonna have to confess, my we just bought my 9-year-old a phone from, from
Hey,
you know, she's 9 years old. She's only third grade, and she has a phone. She has an iPhone. I bought it mostly because I'm like, she's really gonna use it more like an iPad, but and I'm inactivating the number, but still. I mean, these kids are like 1 year olds. You're seeing them as soon as they know how to like, have mobility. They're like know how to turn on your phone at like a few months old, and so I think we're for sure in the days of technology and with the church not staying on top of technology and utilizing it as part of their discipleship, are missing out on a huge opportunity. They're missing out on how to engage their members where they're at. And then on top of that, I would say another strategic thing that we're thinking through and constantly evaluating is really a leadership. Um, it's not a it's in line with discipleship development, but leadership development within that. Just because like we're starting to see churches struggling to find actually good, committed, either high level volunteers or staff. What I've already started to do the last 5 years is create a leadership pipeline. Just right out of high school, it's like, hey, let's start developing you. Let's actually start seeing if you're committed to being developed, because then we can start capturing you early and start showing you and developing you and providing you access or even ability to recognize, man, what is my purpose in life and what has God created me for? And let's help you develop into that so that now we have somebody in the church that's confident, equipped, and understands what their purpose in life is.
so technology is both a problem because infrastructure was lacking, at least for many churches before getting into COVID. But how about the threat of technology? Like, can you do digital discipleship, right? Will
Yeah,
AI chatbot kind of
yeah,
obsolete the need for churches and pastors? I mean,
yeah.
what are you guys thinking about it at that level, or is it strictly pretty much getting the churches to stand up with enough structure to just operate digitally?
I think it depends on the level of like, the church. I mean, some of the mega churches are already kind of working through the how to manage data and the high level data analysis and stuff like that and maximizing that. The smaller churches, maybe newer churches, are still working through that. I do think that the dynamics of utilizing technology, you got to be careful with it, right? Because I think society wise, like we can't there. I think at this point, everybody is used to, if I need to find now with even ChatGPT, if it's like if I need to find any information, I no longer need to go and call my pastor about like a theological question. Like I can just YouTube it, I can ChatGPT it, I can Google it. Before it was Google it, now it's ChatGPT it. And so it's like that portion of need of the clergy or the pastoral role or the executive pastor, is, I don't think it's there anymore with the younger generation. I do think though with the younger generation, what they are seeking is, and what I'm experiencing is more mentorship, right? That it's the true discipleship. Like, hey,
Boom.
come in. I want to invite you and come and walk life, come and experience life with me. Let's go on a hike together and talk life and talk, come into a church meeting with me and see how like we have conversations about Sunday or this year's sermon series. Like, bring them alongside. Hey, come and grab dinner with my family and see the interactions I have with my kids or the interactions I have with my wife, because maybe you never grew up. You grew up in a single mom, single parent home, or your family dynamics were just unhealthy and you don't know what healthy family dynamics looks like. Those are the things I'm seeing the younger generation are desiring over just feed me information, feed me knowledge.
You are living in a world, and you brought this up a minute ago, where people are saying everything I need to know, whether it's theology, taxes, or how I should go date somebody, I can get online. And then you just made a beautiful statement. I'm so thankful you said this. People are really hungry, especially the young people are really hungry for a human relationship, because digital mentoring, I'm seeing lots of interesting projects, but they're incredibly ineffective. And I doubt, personally, theologically, intellectually, corporately, organizationally, I doubt they ever will be effective. They can be better than nothing. You, as an executive pastor, and I'm talking about all the XPs that are with you in XP Network, you as executive pastors, how do you see your role shaping discipleship as technology tries to crowd the very space you're working in?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really going back to what I'm trying to talk through is the leadership, developing the leadership pipeline. That's more one-on-one or group coaching, just creating experiences where they get a chance to have touch points with pastors or staff members, to be able to come into the office and experience what it really looks like to lead a church and develop a church. I've actually had a few churches ask me about, like, hey, Kevin, what are you doing for, like, we'll do like a summer internship program, that's a 4 month thing. It's like, Kevin, like, how are you doing this? Because I need to develop something beyond just like the system process of your next step, right? Like that whole system of like, your first time guests at a church, your next step is go do a starting point or a growth track thing. Like that's a systematic thing that just helps like the organization, they should probably talk to that, the organization like continue to live and thrive, but it's not moving necessarily the needle of the one person being discipled and being walked through in their spiritual journey. And the way we were mapping it was like, as soon as somebody's in a small group, okay, they're being discipled, they're growing spiritually, and somehow, some ways, the Holy Spirit is going to, move and grow them, and that's it. Like, but it's like I think we have, well, as executive pastors, managing this system, this execution of the mandate of making disciples. Like we have to have a better tracking and a better method of knowing that how everybody's moving along in their journey, and it can't be done on a systematically gives a structure, but it has to be done more one-on-one and where there's personal touch points.
Raymond, how would you set up a metric on discipleship if you were going to try to measure?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I wanted to ask that question.
Let's pretend that you did. You asked the question. Who are you?
It's been something that you and I have agonized over anyway. People, I mean, you've got the old MBA thing. So Kevin is in line with us. I hear it in his voice all the time. What you measure is what you get. And if you don't measure it, you don't get it. How do you measure people's personal development? But what if we change the notion of the metric? What if we decided that Jesus told us to love one another, not to pursue moral perfection, that my
Mm,
growth in Christ is not taming all the sins in my life, but it's giving myself to my neighbor and
yeah.
doing things for others.
I think one of the big challenges that we're facing is that we have moved away from basically the encouragements in Matthew 28. And when I think about John 6, where we, to put it in a manufacturing context, since Raymond is manufacturing and Kevin's got an MBA, there's reliability development growth testing. You're constantly saying, what's the mean time between failure? What's the
Right.
ability of a particular widget product or a device to be able to sustain X number of hours and operate? And I think for us, if we're going to be really clinical about this, and I know discipleship is not going to be something that fits in a box beautifully, but I think one of the things churches don't do, we are beginning to see studies like the Great De-Churching, Jim Davis, Michael Graham's book that's recently come out, talking about 40 million people have walked out the back door and we didn't even know it, don't even
Yeah.
understand who's leaving the church. So there's one that probably needs a head scratcher for another conversation, but I think the upfront conversation goes something like this. I'm taking a shot at it. You guys can beat me up. I think one of the issues that we have is the best metric on the table for discipleship is sincere journals of Kevin has been discipling Dennis.
Yeah.
Dennis is now discipling
Right.
Raymond. We are
Right.
5 years down the road. Kevin is now discipling Harry. Dennis is discipling Bill. Raymond's discipling John. And we're seeing the tree build, even if they don't show back up in my
Yeah.
church. The journals are showing us that we are
Yeah.
disciples who make disciples, as opposed to how many butts did we have in the seat for the seminar?
Right.
Dennis, let me push back and one of the things you touched on, which I should have mentioned because I do think it's the most important metric that we can actually measure, and that's retention. Retention and longevity. If you measured longevity and retention, how long do people stay in this church, and how many people are we losing from time to time? If there were two metrics, I think that would tell you whether or not a church was healthy, those are the metrics. How long? What's the average duration of my membership? What's my longest members?
I'll challenge that, Raymond, because COVID revealed a lot. Like there was some churches that had some long lasting members that were attending, were serving, maybe even leading at high capacity, and all of a sudden COVID hit and it's like boom, just disappeared. And not only not in cases, not only just disappeared in like attending, giving, and stuff. And like they just it wasn't a transfer to another church. It's like they just stopped attending church. They just stopped involved in church. They just stopped. Yeah, which revealed and that was the I think the revealer for most churches, because that was the major shock during COVID, is church leaders were like, what is happening? Because the people we thought who were committed, obviously there was some who stayed and like committed and all, but there was quite a few that just quit, and some transferred, but there was quite a few that were just like gone. And there's just now slowly maybe starting to come back to church.
I'm thinking that there are a number of leaders, executive pastors, small group leaders, some senior pastors, some very isolated, lonely pastors, Kevin, and they're looking at you on this podcast and going, can you help me? What message would you want to convey to people about being a pastor, an executive pastor, a challenged pastor in the times that we're in? What would you like to say as your final minute, since you own it, as we close up today?
Um, I think as executive pastors, our metric that we track is how well do we check off our to-do list, right? And so we're so heavily focused on production and execution, and we missed out on what I think one of the major topics we were talking about in regards to discipleship, of being relational. And so I just would encourage us to invest in that. Invest in three areas. Be relational with God. Invest in that because, sometimes we can get caught up on, my work is my relationship with God, right? Like my ministry work is, and it's not. It's just work. It is work. And so just being able to differentiate that and spend the quality time with God, spend the quality time with yourself and your family, and then spend the quality time with the people, literally the people that God trusts you, your church to, that walk into your doors every Sunday, every program that you guys are hosting, every service you're hosting, trusting that you guys will lead them not to a system, not to a next step, but to God. And I think that would be the game changer. I'll kind of highlight with this since I didn't drop a verse, but it feels like it's adequate in this space. Matthew 7. I love Matthew 7. I love all of Matthew that just talks about kingdom of God and the King. Matthew 7:22 highlights, on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare, Jesus says, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. I just that's a verse that constantly challenges me because it's like, man, how many of us are serving for his name's sake and are like literally prophesying in his name, doing all these things in his name, seeing people saved in his name. And like my fear is because we allowed our identity to be tied to the works that we do and not the relationship and the connection we have and the invest and the understanding of God being our King and the understanding of that we missed being with him. And so I think that's just a challenge I would like to give executive pastors, man. When you're checking off that to-do list and it looks good and church is booming or whatever you think the metric of success is booming, like really check is the success of your relationship with God.
Kevin, I want you to wrap up on two fronts. The first one I want to ask is, if people want to creep your world and figure out what's going on at XP Gathering Network, how do we find you and what do we do about it? Tell us where to go look, and we'll put this on the screen.
Yeah. No, just follow us at XP Gathering on IG or Instagram, and Facebook is also XP Gathering. You can follow us there. We do have a private network, digital network that we engage in as well, and you can find those links on our Instagram or website as well. Our website is xpgathering.com.
Raymond, I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed this chat with Kevin.
Oh yeah, it's been great fun.
I love it. Yeah, same here. I've enjoyed it, Raymond, connecting with you, and Dennis, always a pleasure.
Kevin, thank you for being with us today on the Disciple Dilemma.
Thank you.
Would you help the church think more about discipleship? Would you help us get the conversation started to talk about the biblical discipleship Jesus gave us? Please follow us. Our website, www.thediscipledilemma.com. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and all the RSS feeds. If you'd follow or like us, you'll help us get leverage in the digital marketplace to talk about the fact that discipleship needs to be talked about. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.